हरि ओम. ओम श्री चिन्मय सद्गुरवे नमः. ओम. श्रीमद् भगवद गीता चैप्टर 5. Commentary by Param Poojya Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda of Chinmaya Mission. Verse number 19. इहैवतिर्जितः सर्वो येषां साम्ये स्थितं मनः निर्दोषमे समं ब्रह्म तस्मात् ब्रह्मणि ते स्थिताः. In this stanza, almost the whole scripture is indicated in the context of the development of the theme. Lord Krishna had to show, first of all, that the perfection described in the previous few stanzas is not a godly idealism to be experienced after a death, is in a specialized world beyond the clouds called the heavens. Puranic Hinduism and all Semitic religions promise a heaven as the glorious goal of existence and spiritual effort. However, to an intelligent man, this promise is nothing more than a charming hallucination and not a positive gain. Such a vague goal cannot be sufficiently encouraging to coax out of an intelligent man all his enthusiasm and sincerity. Contrary to this vague hope, here in Vedanta, the naked truth is declared when Krishna repeats what the rishis had earlier asserted 1,000 times. It is expressly mentioned that the relative existence as a limited ego center can be ended, and the imperfect individual can realize himself to be the infinite Godhead. This goal can be reached not only at a post-mortem stage, but also in this very same life, here in this very body, among these very same worldly objects. One can live in the consciousness of God, evolving oneself from the immaturities of the deluded ego sense. Who is capable of gaining this ascendancy in himself? What is the secret method by which his consummate self-redemption can be effectively fulfilled? The assertion that man can reach this goal in this very life is made in the first line by the detailed description of how it can be executed and practically lived. It is said that the one whose mind rests in evenness gains the divinity tranquility of a God man. Patanjali Yoga Sutra also explains the same fact in different words. Yogaschitta vritti nirodha. Patanjali Yoga Sutra 2, where the thought flow which creates unequal and spasmodic mental fluctuations is arrested. There the mind ends. Where the mind ends, it being the equipment through which life expresses as a limited ego, this sense of separative existence also ends. When the mind has ended, the egocentric thraldom of samsara also ends. The ego, thus unrest of its samsaric sorrows, rediscovers itself to be nothing other than the self itself. Unless one comes to this mental equipoise, one is not capable of experiencing the samatvam of the samadarshi described in the above stanza. Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. Gita 2.48. Such an individual who has conquered his mind and has come to live in perfect equanimity in all conditions of life, in all its relationships. Krishna vehemently asserts he indeed rests in Brahman. This may look rather illogical at the first reading, and therefore, as an explanation in a parenthetical clause, Krishna gives his reasons for such a daring assertion. He says, since Brahman is even and ever perfect, Brahman is homogeneous and all pervading, everything happens in it, and yet nothing happens to it. Thus, the truth remains changeless and ever the same, just as the riverbed remains ever motionless, although the units of water flowing in it are ever changing. It is a quality of the substratum to remain changeless. All manifestations and superimpositions by their very nature must change. An individual in his identifications with his body, etc., becomes a changing factor, a victim of every passing disturbance, but the substratum, the self, ever remains the same. An individual who has discovered for himself a sufficient amount of tranquility in which nothing dares disturb him anymore is certainly one who has plumbed the depths and touched the bottom. A reed on the waves will be tossed up and down by the waves, but a lighthouse built upon firm rocks always remains upright and changeless, allowing even the stormy waves to exhaust their anger at its feet. Krishna's argument is thus logically sound when he declares that a mortal among us who can maintain his equanimity under all conditions, as explained in the foregoing stanzas, is indeed one who has contacted the divine and the eternal in himself. He indeed rests in Brahman. Because Brahman, the self, is homogeneous and without blemishes, therefore, resting in Brahman with steady intellect and undeluded, the knower of Brahman neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. Just as an excellent artist working at his masterpiece on his canvas would again and again approach his piece of art to add more details with finer strokes to his picture, and would again and again retreat from the canvas to gaze at his art from a distance, so too here the Lord is creating with his chosen words the picture of the mental life of a man of equipoise and perfection upon the canvas of man's heart. He dedicates many stanzas in order that the picture may clearly and vividly come into the recognition and appreciation of even the ordinary causal student. Here is yet another stanza offered with a burning enthusiasm and almost missionary zeal, so that Arjun, the confused, may come to gain a vivid picture of the man of perfection, who is not a mere potent stone idol on the Ganges banks, but a veritable dynamic factor that molds and influences his generation of fellow beings. न प्रवृष्येत् प्रियं प्राप्य नो द्विजेत् च प्राप्य च प्रियं स्थिरबुद्धिरसम्मूढो ब्रह्मविद् ब्रह्मणि स्थितः 20. Ordinarily, man gets excited or becomes despondent not because of the happenings in the outer world, but because of his individual contact with them. In any man, if any man dies in the city, it is not tragedy to me, but when my father dies, it is my calamity. This clearly proves that that the death of a man in itself cannot bring any disturbance to my mind unless my mind has already projected itself on its relationship to the individual who has died. The man of perfection who has won over his mind and has come to experience the infinite self can no more therefore feel any joy on receiving what is pleasant nor grieve on receiving what is unpleasant. It does not mean that a man of perfection is a wooden doll or an iron statue incapable of reacting to the external things, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant. It only means that a man of true inward culture discovers in himself, in his own wisdom, a balance and an equipoise which cannot be shattered very easily. When a man of such superhuman mental steadfastness is analyzed, we can easily discover that no condition or circumstances in the outer world can ever gain an entry into the inner precincts of his personality. His intellect becomes steady since it is not poisoned with the usual egocentric misconceptions. It is in fact very interesting to note how the ideas arranged in this stanza, in their very sequence, explain a wondrous truth. One who is unaffected by the presence of things good or bad is the one whose intellect is steady, and the one whose intellect is steady is the one in whom all delusions have ended. A steady intellect from which all delusions have dropped becomes the instrument of knowing Brahman, and the one who knows Brahman becomes Brahman, and therefore comes to live established in the Brahmic consciousness of infinite beatitude, a living God man walking upon the earth that is Olympus to him. Moreover, resting in Brahman 21, with the self unattached to external contacts, he finds happiness in the self. With the self engaged in the meditation of Brahman, he attains endless happiness. बाह्यस्पर्शेष्व सक्तात्मा विन्दत्यात्मनि यत्सुखं स ब्रह्मयोगयुक्तात्मा सुखमक्षयमश्नुते. The foregoing stanza might give to an unprepared student the idea that spiritual life is a static existence where a baked, stony heart vainly comes to contact with the heart throbs in the world of objects and feels for itself nothing but a momentous equanimity. In that case, a majority of us, without much discussion, can take our hats off and say goodbye to all spirituality immediately. For who can deny the fact that the world, as it is constituted today, in spite of its perfections, when it comes in contact with our own inner world, however adjusted the inner world may be, can and does give minute flashes of joy. Why should I deny myself the brilliant flashes of momentary joys in exchange for a steady stone like impregnable monotony Call it equilibrium or equanimity, peace or godhood. By changing the name, the thing itself is never changed. This doubt is not a mere exaggeration. This is often heard in the halls of Vedanta from the lips of all sincere seekers. Any sensible seeker entering the halls of spiritual study with his intellect bright and clear should come to doubt its efficacy and utility. No teacher can afford to ignore answering these questions and reassuring the students. Krishna, as a professional teacher, is doing the same in this stanza. The one who has gained complete detachment from the external objects realizes the bliss that is the nature of the self. Though the process of self development is essentially a process of detachment, this technique of negation does not take us to an empty and purposeless zero. But when we have negated all that is false, we come to experience and live a total positivity. When the dreamer has renounced all its contacts with the dream world and thrown away his dream personality, he does not become a non entity, but he rediscovers himself to be the more vital, the more effective personality and the waker of the waker. Similarly, whenever contacts with the external world through the media of the body, the mind, and the intellect are clipped off clean, we are awakened in the meadows of God consciousness and come to live the joy that is eternal nature of the self. A seeker having thus redeemed his own mind and intellect from their preoccupations with the external world, at least during his meditation, when he comes to keep his heart devoted to the meditation of Brahman, attains imperishable happiness. Here, the term heart is to be understood as a collective name for the inner instruments of knowing and experiencing. For the following reasons, also, he should withdraw the senses from the external world of objects. 22. The enjoyments that are born of contacts are only generators of pain, for they have a beginning and an end. O son of Kunti, the wise do not rejoice in them. ये हि संस्पर्शजा भोगा दुःखयोनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः कौन्तेय न तेषु रमते बुधः. We as seekers try to detach ourselves from the external contacts in order to enjoy the infinite bliss which is the nature of the self. Even an average intelligent man, if he cares to investigate his own experiences with the outer world, will discover all by himself that joy hunting among the finite objects is no profitable preoccupation. The law of diminishing utility works in all our experiences, and the very thing that gave a certain unit of joy in the beginning itself soon becomes a stinking, putrefying pit of sorrow. The experiences with the first laddu and the 25th laddu, when you are not angry, are a practical demonstration of this fundamental truth that sensuous joys are doomed to pain from the very beginning. A sense object can only be as beautiful and joyous as a leprous whore, painted, powdered, and dressed up to smile at strangers in the dark alleys of a dilapidated commercial town. Lord Krishna beautifully brings out this idea when he points out to Arjun how sense objects and their joys, being finite in nature, do not enchant a wise man. Man, if he is wise, is satisfied only with the infinite. Finite things can only torture us with hopes of getting a more satisfactory joy and whip us along the path of sensuousness, making us pant in sheer exhaustion, hunting for a complete satisfaction from ditch to ditch, from gutter to gutter. The chaster, the fuller, the diviner joy is gained only when we come to experience the self, as explained in the previous stanza. And there is also a wicked thing, an enemy of the path of bliss, a most difficult thing to deal with, the source of all evil, very difficult to ward off. Mighty efforts should be made, says the Lord, to repel this enemy. 23. He who is able, while still here in this world, to withstand before the liberation from the body, meaning death, the impulse born out of desire and anger, he is a yogi, he is a happy man. शक्नोति हैव यः सोढुं प्राक्शरीरविमोक्षणात् कामक्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः स सुखी नरः. 23. Krishna himself feels that his over enthusiastic description of the perfect man and his mental life may give to an reader a despairing sense of impossibility or futility. No one living the present life of agitations can ever dare to hope that such a perfect happiness is ever possible for a mortal living upon this ever spinning globe. If a philosophy is only an idealism which has no contact with the practical world, that philosophy is mere utopia, poetry, fit for entertaining a pleasant idea, but never capable of making man a nobler being. In order to remove that misunderstanding, Krishna in this stanza gives the assurance that man is capable of living that perfect joy in this very world, if only he makes the necessary adjustments in himself. My great grandfather was a great violinist. His violin was preserved and worshipped in my house until now. I too have now gained a preliminary nodding acquaintance with music. Suddenly an idea struck me. Why not take my great grandfather's instrument and play upon it and thus become a great musician overnight? If I play directly upon that ancient and faithful instrument, I will be forced to break it into pieces. That violin in that condition cannot give me perfect music. It needs general cleaning and dusting, perhaps restringing and a lot of tuning up. When these adjustments are made, then only can it faithfully give out all the notes, implicitly obeying the strokes of my bow and the tickling of my finger. In the same fashion, today, our mind and intellect, the instruments of singing the song of perfection, neglected from beginningless time, need a lot of readjustments before they can gurgle out their contents of laughter and joy. The technique of readjusting the inner instruments is beautifully summarized here by Lord Krishna. The very brevity and simplicity of this verse are the obstacles to our understanding its full import. The advice has a deceptive look of simplicity. Withstand the impulse of desire and anger. Then he is a yogi, even while here, before his death, the happy man. To a modern student of Freud and others, soaked with the ideas of behaviorism and such other modern superficialities of psychology. This may look rather an unscientific expression of a crude enthusiast, but when we analyze and try to grapple with its full import and implication, we shall see that it contains volumes of suggestions. Desire is the avalanche of thoughts sweeping down from the pinnacle of our intellect along the valley of our heart towards an object of desire in the outer world. When this avalanche of thought is barricaded in its sweep by a substantial obstacle ere it reaches its destination, the blast with which it shatters itself on that obstacle is called anger. It is these two types of thoughts that generally agitate our bosom. The greater the desire with which we ponder over an object, the greater shall be the anger against any obstacle that comes between our object of desire and us. To one who has won over joy and grief, and who has gained a certain amount of detachment from external objects, desire for obtaining the pleasant or avoiding the unpleasant is not emotion at all. Where there is no desire, hatred is an unknown alien factor there. He who has gained mastery over these two impulses, powerful and almost irresistible as they are, as he who can afford to live in this world of multiplicity and imperfections, as an independent solitary man of true and steady happiness. Thus, Krishna assures Arjun, and through Arjun, all others like us who will read and try to understand this immortal scripture, that man can live perfectly happily even while in this form, among these very objects, in this very world, during this very life, if only he, in his spiritual evolution, learns to renounce his impulses and desire and hatred. What sort of a man resting in Brahman attains Brahman? The Lord says, 24. He who is happy within, who rejoices within, who is illuminated within, that yogi attains freedom or moksha himself, becoming Brahman. योऽन्तः सुखोऽन्तरारामस्तथान्तर्ज्योतिरेव यः स योगी ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं ब्रह्मभूतोऽधिगच्छति. From the above three stanzas, it becomes clear that, according to Krishna, none of the usual fields of joy and happiness are visited by the man of perfection. Neither the warmth of the flesh, nor the thrills of emotion, nor the ecstasies of thinking are available for him. Renouncing them all and conquering both love and hatred, the yogi in sheer transcendence attains a realm of bliss, and Krishna declares that such a man alone can be said to be really happy. It becomes very difficult to believe that a man in that condition would feel any happiness at all. All instruments of happiness have been rejected by him. There is no more any field for him to gain joy or satisfaction. Renouncing all food, one cannot have any joy of eating. Again, it is against the very logic and rhythm of life to say that man will be satisfied by a mere emptiness, a dark cave of total negation. Every living creature roams about in all its available fields of activity, seeking to gain and achieve a greater fulfillment of joy. Even the state of complete absence of pain, though it is a platform of relief, is not the summit where an individual will feel contented and fully satisfied. Under the above circumstances, it will be mere exaggeration to believe Krishna's assertion in the previous three stanzas. To avoid such a serious misunderstanding among the students, the Lord is here trying to find out for us the positive glow of assured divinity when the ego rediscovers itself to be the self as it renounces all its delusory preoccupations with the false and the fleeting. The substantial and definite experience of solid bliss enjoyed and lived by the self, in the self as the self, is indicated here in this stanza. The seeker, in his detachment, not only withdraws himself from the world of objects outside, but also discovers in himself an ampler sense of bliss and security. This inward joy is not a rare flickering flash, but a constantly experienced factor. Such a well developed seeker, striving constantly on the path, comes to rediscover, come to discover a field of fruitful entertainment and engaging recreation in the brilliant light of joyous satisfaction within himself. To him, his entire within is flooded with the light of pure consciousness. His heart is thereafter alit with the glow divine. Such an individual who has withdrawn himself completely within, where he has learned to enter at will and court and live in it, is the one who has come to know Brahman. In his realization of the infinite, he has come to experience the bliss of Brahman, the smokeless shrine of truth. Moreover, 25. Those rishis obtain absolute freedom or moksha, whose sins have been destroyed, whose dualities are torn asunder, who are self controlled and intent on the welfare of all beings. लभन्ते ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं ऋषयः क्षीणकल्मषाः छिन्नद्वैधा यतात्मानस्तरोभूतहिते रताः. When a man of meditation, striving diligently, with his senses well under his control, comes to wash off all his sinful mental impressions, which had been creating in him the veiling of the self behind an unending array of doubts regarding the reality, he gains the joy of the self when his ignorance, which is nothing other than agitations of the mind, vikshepa, and the consequent veiling of the truth, avarana, has been removed. Knowledge of his real nature dawns in his bosom, and he rediscovers himself as the self. Having thus rediscovered the self, having thus gained the goal of all evolution, what would be the duties of such an individual in this existence till finally, with a cheerful farewell, he drops his mortal coil down to merge himself with what is he knows to be his own self. The general impression is that he will move about in the world like a mad walking stone statue that eats at least once a day, a threat to society, a moving bundle of contagion, and a screaming pillar of despondency and despair. Such a living death is not the goal indicated by the Vedas, nor did the Hindu rishis ever try to carve out of man a walking corpse. Self realization is not a melancholy parade crawling to a predestined tomb, but it is a joyous ride to the palace of truth from which man has wandered away in his own ignorance and confusion. A true prophet is one who lives consumed in an ever reviving fire of love. He ceaselessly strives to bring out the self from the non self that is veiling it in all other forms around and about him. This is indicated by the term engaged in the good of all beings. This Lokaseva becomes his recreation, his self appointed engagement. His body, mind, and intellect are offered as oblations into the sacred fires of activity, and while remaining at rest within him, who are free from desire and anger, who have controlled their thoughts and who have realized the self. कामक्रोधवियुक्तानां यतीनां यतचेतसाम् अभितो ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं वर्तते विदितात्मनां. By the work of serving mankind, the duties of reinstating godly life in the bosom of the satanic age, the love in the heart that tries to redeem the prostitute or to cure the leper, the joyful enthusiasm to light and guide where darkness and blindness revel. The Master is not bartering away his chances to live as a God of gods, even in this world, here and now. Just as a doctor working among the unhealthy and the suffering is not himself contaminated by the unhealthy and the suffering is not himself contaminated by the diseases or the sorrows, so too a mastermind working amongst the wretched and the lustful, the passionate and the sensuous, the false and the low, is not in any sense of the term touched even by a passing breeze of the stink around him. How this immunity is maintained and preserved by a man of equipoise, even amongst the temptations of the vicious atmosphere, is indicated here in this stanza. When a sincere seeker has, through his own intelligent self effort and divine self application, redeemed himself from the secret charms of the ever murmuring hosts of sense appetites in himself, When he has conquered the instincts of lust and anger in him, when he has thus completely mastered all threats arising from within him and those that come to him from outside, such a sincere pursuer of the life divine, when he has known the self, gains the bliss of perfection both here and hereafter. And now, to enunciate the Dhyana Yoga, the nearest and the most efficient means to right knowledge, the Lord teaches the path of meditation in the following few aphoristic verses. 27. Shuttering out all external contacts and fixing the gaze as though between the eyebrows, equalizing the outgoing and incoming breath moving within the nostrils, with senses, mind, and intellect ever controlled, having liberation as a supreme goal, free from desire, fear, and anger, the sage is verily liberated forever. स्पर्शान् कृत्वा बहिर्बाह्यांश्चक्षुश्चैवान्तरे भ्रुवोः प्राणापानौ समौ कृत्वा नासाभ्यन्तरचारिणौ यतेन्द्रियमनोबुद्धिर्मुनिर्मोक्षपरायणः विगतेच्छा भयक्रोधो यः सदा मुक्त एव सः. In these two aphoristic stanzas, the Lord has hinted at the summary of the entire following chapter. This is the traditional style in Sanskrit textbooks on Brahma Vidya, wherein each section is closed after indicating the following section. The above verses give us a complete picture of the man of perfection and his purposeful life at all levels of his existence. Students of Vedanta are ever anxious to live the perfection. They are not dreamers content with flirting with utopian idealisms, but they are the most utilitarian, practical men of the world who want to live a more purposeful, efficient, and effective life in the world. Therefore, they are not enamored of mere ideas, however noble they may be, unless those ideas can actually be lived in life. How to achieve the perfect mental equipoise, which has been indicated in the previous stanzas, should be the question that must agitate the minds of all true seekers. Here, as a summary, with lots of dots and dashes, Krishna is giving the scheme of practice by which every diligent pursuer can gain a complete integration. These two stanzas become rough notes to be enlarged upon and exhausted with details and descriptions in the next chapter. The external world of objects, it has already been said, cannot by itself bring any disturbance to any one of us. It is only when we are in contact with the world of objects that we suffer the agitations in life. So long as we are standing on the bank of a river or on the seashore, the waves in the water cannot buffet us. It is only when we are in contact with them that we will be tossed hither and thither. Forms, sounds, tastes, smells, and touches constantly bring their objects to agitate the mind, but we shall get agitated by them only when we are identifying ourselves with our mental conditions. If we therefore shut out the external objects not by physical methods such as plugging the ears, but by a discrete intellectual detachment from our mental agitations to the intellectual from our mental reactions to the external world of objects. We shall discover in ourselves the necessary tranquility to start meditation. It is a great mistake that seekers often take the foregoing instruction too literally. They converge their eyeballs and gaze towards the space between the eyebrows for the purpose of meditation. This is an exaggeration, though it faithfully follows the instructions laid down here. It is to be understood as Shankaracharya ji says, to gaze as it were towards the point between the two eyebrows. It is psychologically very true that when we are looking as it were towards the brow, our gaze would be turned upward at about 45 degrees to the vertical backbone. In that attitude of upward gaze, the human mind is held uplifted and it becomes the right vehicle for higher contemplation. There is an intimate relationship between the rhythm of the flow of breath in us and our own mental thought conditions. The more agitated the mind is, the more spasmodic, spasmodic, and uncertain becomes the rhythm of our breathing. Therefore, the instructions here, which advises us to control our breath flow, to make it even within the nostrils, becomes a conducive physical practice for coaxing the mind to a relatively quieter existence. These circumstances are all mainly physical adjustments for creating a conducive mental atmosphere. In the following stanza, the necessary adjustments to control the mental and the intellectual sheets are hinted at. The tireless seeker is asked to control his sense appetites, mental oscillations, and intellectual storms by dedicating all his outer and inner activities to the one great eternal goal of reaching perfection, realizing the self. As far as the taming of the intellect is concerned, the advice given by Krishna is that the seeker should renounce desires, fears, and anger. In renouncing these three qualities, psychologically speaking, Krishna has expounded an exhaustive theory of self development and inner growth. There is an intimate relationship between these three: desire, fear, and anger. Desire we had found earlier in that pattern of thought in which the mind runs constantly towards a given object with an anxious expectations of procuring and possessing it. Where there is desire, there we come to experience fear. And it is very well known that when we desire a thing so much as to live ever in the fear of losing it, maddening anger can exhibit itself at any moment against any threat of an obstacle between ourselves and our object of desire. When these three emotions, desire, fear, and anger, are controlled, we have controlled almost all the mad impulses of our intellect. He who has thus freed himself from desire, fear, and anger, who has controlled his senses, mind, and intellect in his all consuming ambition for liberation, and who has quietened the flow of his breath, such as such an individual could remain in the contemplation of truth without contact with the external world, his eyes fixed steadily and held in an upward gaze. Krishna says, such a man of meditation is verily free forever. This assertion that such an individual is verily free forever is an anticipatory truth and not an accomplished fact. In ordinary conversation, we use the phrase baking of bread, which in its literal meaning is false, since bread need not be baked. We bake only dough. But in such usages, what we mean is that the goal is not too far away from the particular act we are doing. Even while boiling water, we say that we are making tea. The idea is that tea making cannot be far away when the water has already been boiled. Similarly, here also, when we have made all the above mentioned adjustments at all levels of our existence, and when we sit in contemplation of the self, we become released from all our misunderstandings and come to experience the freedom of Godhood ere long, Achirena. What has he whose mind is thus steadily balanced to know and meditate upon in the Jnana Yoga? 29. Knowing me as enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities, the great Lord of all worlds, the friend of all beings, he attains peace. He attains peace on knowing me. भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सुहृदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति. It is never to be forgotten that in the Gita, whenever Lord Krishna uses the first person singular, he does not mean the mortal framework of the son of Devaki, but indicates the self in the individual, the eternal principle, Shri Krishna Paramatman. The self is the real vitality behind the ego, Jiva, which functions in identification with the matter envelopments and feels that it is the doer and enjoyer. The term yajna has been already explained earlier in its Gita implication. Yajna is the self-dedicated work which one performs in any field of activity. Tapas means all self-denial and practices of self-control which the ego undertakes in order to integrate and receive its own capacities to seek its real identity with the eternal. The self is certainly the Maheshwara, the Lord of all lords, the God of all gods. Here, the Ishvara is to be understood as the controller of all fields of activities of perception and expression. Each one of them is considered as presided over by various faculties, and they are termed as devas, meaning illuminators. The faculty of seeing illumines the field of the eyes and thus gives the knowledge of forms and colors. The faculty of hearing illumines the field of the ears and thus provides the knowledge of sound and so on. The Self is, in fact, the Lord of all these individual lords, governing, controlling, and ruling over the various fields. Therefore, Lord Krishna, as the Self, confers upon himself the title of Sarvaloka Maheshwara. In our ordinary experiences in the world, the man who has kingly powers is very difficult to approach, and the King of Kings, the personality striking awe and reverence in the heart of the ordinary man, becomes almost unapproachable to the ordinary people. Therefore, the Lord has to qualify his title of Sarvaloka Maheshwara within the epithet that he is at the same time a friend of all living creatures. The term knowing is not objectively knowing Krishna in the sense in which we come to know a flower or a fruit, but here the term knowing is to be understood as realizing spiritual experience is the realization of the self to be the one great ruler within, who presides over all the activities within the body politic. He who is the one at whose altar the perfection seeking ego surrenders all its spiritual activities, and as a tribute to whom the seeker brings all his self denial and asceticism. Knowing him to be none other than Krishna, the individual reaches the goal of free peace, the eternal sanctum of perfection. Thus, in the Upanishad of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, in the science of the eternal, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the fifth discourse ends titled Yoga of True Renunciation. Om, 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 Om. Om Tatsiti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Karma Sannyasa Yogo Nama Panchamodhyaya. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Om Shri Chinmaya Sadgurave Namaha. Hari Om.